Welcome to the Leadership for Society program. I'm Professor Brian Lowery at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And the theme this year of our series is the intersection of public and private leadership. And I'm really excited to have Rick Caruso today to talk to us about his experiences in both public and private leadership. Thanks so much for taking the time, Rick.
My pleasure. Good to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you've engaged in quite a mix of private enterprise and public leadership. And you're a very prominent figure in LA in all sorts of ways. Can you tell us a little bit about the roles you've played in LA, the positions you've held, and the things you've done?
Brian, I was very lucky from a very young age. After I graduated from law school, I was given the opportunity to work for Tom Bradley, who was mayor at the time. And this was in the sort of mid to late 80s. And I was 26 years old, and through a mutual friend, he appointed me as a commissioner to the Department of Water and Power. And that was my first really public service role. And down here in Los Angeles, every major department has a board of commissioners that oversee it. Those commissioners are appointed by the mayor. They're non-paid positions. You donate your time, but you have a lot of influence over what happens in the operations of it. So it was a great learning experience for me to understand how government worked, obviously at times how it didn't work, to work for somebody who really was, I think, historically one of the best mayors we've had in Los Angeles, a really legendary guy, and how he viewed politics from the standpoint of making the city operate. And I worked under Dick Reardon after that as a commissioner. I worked under Jimmy Hahn as the police commissioner. And so I've loved my public service role. But I think what made my public service role effective or more effective was the fact that I also had experience in the private sector along the way. And the intersection, to use your word, the intersection of those two things, public and private, bringing that to service of the city, was really rewarding for me. And I think I was pretty effective because I looked at things with a little different point of view than others did.
Mm. Excuse me. Can you tell us a little bit about the private roles that you've had, like the private enterprises you've run?
Well, I was a lawyer by training, as I said, and I practiced for about 6 years. And at the time, just to give context to this, because it's important for context, I got a job at the time with the largest law firm in the United States. It was called Finley Cumble Wagner. It had a whole bunch more names. And I say that because, to my surprise, about 6 years into this, me practicing law there, and I was a corporate securities lawyer, the firm went bankrupt. And the senior partner came in my office and said, "Rick, here's your check. I highly recommend you go downstairs very quickly and cash it because it may not clear tomorrow." And that forced a decision. I went back home. I had just gotten married, forced a decision. I was with my wife. Do I go back and practice law? And she said, "You've always wanted to get into the real estate side of the world and you love development. Now's the time to go do it." And I started my company. There was a great assistant that I had, executive assistant named Laura, and it was the two of us, and started the company. And I built my company from scratch since then and still operate today. That was about 35, 36 years ago. And we're in the development business, development and operating. And so we build retail, outdoor retail properties, and we have apartments, and we have a resort up in Montecito.
That's fantastic. It's an interesting combination because the public side and the private side is the development. There's a lot of interaction between the public and private on the development side, I assume. Um,
Very, very much so, Brian. That's a really good point. I think one of the things that really has given me a great benefit in the development side of the business, which is always very complicated, especially in a big city, especially in California, is understanding how government works and knowing how to navigate through government. Because we've been able to build projects that other people had failed at before us. Our team is really good at navigating through the political system and the requirements in order to get a project entitled. And we want to be in tough jurisdictions. because that's where you create value.
That's fantastic. I do want to kind of shift a little bit to politics because you've had some and maybe still do political ambitions. And one of the things that we strive to do in this course is really think about where people disagree and how they can have conversations across difference, like meaningful conversations where there can be significant differences, but still there should be the ability to have reasonable conversation across that difference. And I bring this up because I also know that you've shifted your political orientation a bit over your career. So you were a Republican at some point, you've been independent, and you're a Democrat now. Can you tell us
Hmm.
a little bit about your political evolution, especially right
Hmm.
now when there's such polarization? Like, how do you think about
Hmm.
navigating those different kind of political place spaces?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was a Republican for many years, and then about 10, 12 years ago, I became an independent. And then decided in California here, you cannot vote in a primary statewide unless, you are affiliated with a party, which I don't agree with. I don't think that should be the rule, but that is a rule. So then I became a Democrat to be more actively participating. And then also I ran for mayor. Listen, I look at it this way. I don't find myself to be an ideologue at all. And I think what's happened in my mind to parties is the party has become more important than the purpose they're there for and who they serve. And that's really why I became an independent. I just got tired of, if you're a Republican, you sort of have to think this way. And if you're a Democrat, you have to think this way. I just don't think that's the way life works. I think we have to be true to ourselves and what we believe in, fashioned by experience, fashioned by knowledge, fashioned by understanding. And I think, to be honest, I think more and more people are moving in that direction. And I hope away from the ideology restrictions of a party. And I believe the greatest thing you can be doing is, frankly, to be in the middle and reaching out to both sides and finding common ground. And it goes to your point, Brian. You've got to create the space where you can have meaningful conversations, even if you meaningfully disagree with somebody else's position, because that's how you get things done and that's how you evolve in your thinking also. Um, I've worked for, two mayors that were Democrats. I worked for a mayor that was a Republican. So I've always crossed those boundaries. And I think that's a really great place to be. And I hope more people go there.
Hmm. So I think I agree with you. I'm in the same kind of place where I have a distaste for dogma, is what I would say.
Yeah.
But when you have political ambitions and you're running, you do need a team. That this is not necessarily how it. I'm not making claim how it should be. I'm making claim where I think we are. And so I wonder how you manage that need. So you have a constituency, right? You're in LA, it's a very democratic city.
Mhm.
How do you avoid or how do you manage the kind of demand that you're part of the team, right? How do you deal with the disagreements you have when it's maybe necessary to show allegiance to a team? How do you manage that?
Well, I manage it by saying I'm never going to compromise my core values or what I believe in order to be part of a team. I don't think anybody should. We don't do that the way we run our company. I'm not going to do that in politics. I'd rather not get elected if I have to go compromise what I believe in. I think that's one of the big problems we have now. Listen, I learned I learned years ago when I was the police commissioner. This is one of the greatest lessons I've learned. It was a very, very tough time in Los Angeles. It was right after the Rodney King beatings. There was a federal consent decree. The federal court was literally running LAPD. We had a very, very popular chief of police, a black gentleman, Bernie Parks, very well liked, and a good cop and a good person, not a good manager. We had crime spiking. And it was my job, along with my fellow commissioners, to make a decision to allow him to stay or fire him and move on. It became very much divided in our community along racial lines, which it should have never gone in that direction, but it did. At the end of the day, the decision was made to not reappoint him, and we hired Bill Bratton out of Boston. Politically, that was a very, very complicated thing to do. To me, because I wasn't worried about getting reelected or reappointed, and I knew it was the right thing to do, there was clarity to it. And what happened was, since we put the right person as chief, we got crime down to levels not seen since 1950. So I've always taken that with me along my career. I took along my campaign. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to share my thoughts and my feelings of what I think is best for those I serve.
Mm.
And if you disagree with me, you disagree with me. And the party disagrees with me, the party disagrees with me.
This is something I've been asking people that I'm really interested in right now. When you're a public servant, you're put in to represent the people that you serve, right? So this is how
Yeah.
a democracy works. But as a leader, you're supposed to kind of lead in a particular direction. How do you manage the tension? How do you decide when you should lead and when you follow just the desires of the community you represent?
Well, when you're a public official, whether you're appointed or whether you're elected, it's your job to serve the residents of Los Angeles, whatever the case is. That's your job. Um, your job as a professor, I would imagine, is to serve your students, right? And again, I think if you wrap what you do around who you're there to serve, decisions become very clear. I've never been conflicted with that. You're not always going to be popular. In fact, you should be prepared to not be popular, and that's okay. But what I don't think you want to do, and well, let me back up. If the community wants something that you don't believe in, that you can't execute on, you probably shouldn't be in the job. You know, so that's where you got to have ethical honesty and a level of morality in doing your job and integrity. I remember years ago, Tom Bradley called me up and asked me to do something at DWP. He said, this should happen for the ratepayers, et cetera. I didn't agree with it. And Tom Bradley taught me a really good lesson. Said, it's not your choice. Your ratepayers have demanded this. You go get it done. And if you can't do that, I respect that, and you should resign. There was a real clarity to that.
Yeah, so let me switch gears a little bit. I know you've been involved in the Building Back LA after the fires, which were
Yep.
horrendous. You have founded an organization, Steadfast LA.
Yep.
And you've been in the public industry, public leadership, as we discussed. You've done private development. In your role now, what is the job of the public leadership in building back, and what is the job of private industry? How do you separate them along those lines, those different kind of areas, roles in building back LA?
Yeah, it's a good question. Part of this is, the old thing where you're building an airplane while you're flying. But we looked at a number of models out there, Brian. I'm sure you know a lot better than I do. When you have a very large public disaster like we had here in Los Angeles, we lost an area 2.5 times the size of Manhattan. It's too big of a job for government to do alone. So there's got to be public-private partnerships. What Steadfast does is a nonprofit, but on the private side, we populated it with people who are donating their time and their talent, the best in individual industries, to roll up your sleeves, come in and solve critical problems with a level of innovation and speed that generally the government doesn't have at their disposal. I'll put it that way. And then we deliver those solutions to the state, the county, and the city, and we say, here you go. Here's how you can go solve this problem. Right now, every one of those initiatives that we have gone after, the city and the county and the state have accepted, which has been great. And because we're doing it in a way that we all want a big win. And the big win, here goes back to the clarity. We are there to serve the community that lost their homes and their jobs, and to get people back in their community. as quickly and safely as possible. That is our singular mission. If what we're doing doesn't organize around that, don't do it. And you have to have that. I think there should be more public and private partnerships just in how the city, the county, and the state operate in order to serve the public better, to serve the public quicker. And you're not bounded by the politics of it. Now, there's always politics, but we're not bounded by it. We have to react to it, but we don't have to agree to it. And it's working incredibly well. I'm really proud of our team.
Mhm. So I see the argument for like speed and innovation that private industry brings, that it's really hard, often for government in particular to emulate. And so I'm curious though, what do you think the role of the government is in this? So is it purposefully to slow things down? Is it just to dictate what the goal should be? Like, what do you think the role of the government is in this?
Well, the role of government is to serve the public, right? And so the role of the government, in my opinion, they have a fiduciary obligation to those that they serve. And I don't think they wake up in the morning and say, let's figure out how to slow things down or to get in the way. I think what happens with government is there's just a lot of red tape that gets embedded in government with the passage of time. And one of the things that a private sector group can bring in is ways, strategies, processes, governance that can unbundle some of that red tape to further the mission of the government, which is to serve the public. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is allow them and help them to get their job done quicker, better, and with less friction. There's a lot of rules in government that, frankly, in my opinion, don't serve anybody, but they're there, so you got to deal with the reality of it. And what we're finding, Brian, and I'm sure you have found this over your career, people that serve, again, elected or appointed, they want to do the right thing. They may not always have the experience or be equipped to do it, and they don't always have the resources to turn to the private sector and say, how can you help me? But in private industry, we make it a rule to reach out to competitors. We make it a rule to reach out to other industries and learn from them, have a sense of curiosity. That's what saved us during COVID.
Mhm.
We were sharing data and information and processes with competitors and others. How are you going to go about this? What are you thinking about doing? I don't know if that culture is really prevalent in government, and hopefully we're bringing that to bear.
Yeah, I think of that as a certainly a benefit that private industry could bring to government. But I'll just say that there's also often a lot of conversation about red tape in government, which it's easy to see how regulations build up over time and become impediments to getting things done. But I wonder if that is also a necessary component of government. And I'll say it this way, that in private industry, you're bearing the risk. So if you're a developer, you're bearing the risk. You go under, putting aside the possibility of any kind of bailout, you internalize that risk. In government, if you go fast and things break, there's not the people who take the risk are the constituents, not the people who basically took that risk. So to what extent do you think there's a necessity for some frictions to reduce the risk or reduce the cost of breaking things? Does that make
Mhm.
sense? Which is something you could argue is part and parcel with innovation.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Brian. In general terms, yes, but right. I mean, don't you think it's a matter of shades of gray? You do need some things in order to, protect the public, make sure the right thing is happening. There's no doubt about that. What does happen, and we see it very clearly in different municipalities that we work in, how to get, just in my world, small world, how to get a project processed and permitted in one community is very different than another community. So what happens is it's sort of, money is like water. It flows to where there's the least restrictions and friction. And what we're seeing in a lot of the big cities now that have become tougher to do business in, that money is going somewhere else. And that's not good for anybody.
Mhm.
But I do think it's a matter of degrees, and you've got to have some safety nets for sure to make sure things don't go off the rails.
Mhm. I like that analogy about, money like being like water. It flows where there's less friction. And it makes me think about the very kinds of the differences in the neighborhoods that were affected by the fires. There were very affluent neighborhoods. We hear a lot about Pacific Palisades because they were really devastated. But then there are neighborhoods that were much less affluent that were affected. And I wonder, as we see rebuilding, like how do we ensure that the rebuilding is done in a way that all the neighborhoods that were affected see the benefits of the efforts to build back better?
Really important. You're absolutely right. It's really important. And that's why my organization, Steadfast LA, is focused on Altadena, Palisades, and Malibu. And different parts of those communities need different things. You have a part of Altadena that you're right, very moderate income, historical components in that town, very important in terms of the size of the homes, the architecture, et cetera. What we're doing to help get those people back into their communities is very different from what maybe a Malibu needs. But embedded in all of these communities, people tend to generalize. Palisades had a big percentage of people that lived there that had lived there for 30, 40, 50 years that were underinsured, maybe house rich, cash poor, cannot afford to rebuild. And that's very sad. And same in Malibu, certainly the same in Altadena. So there are multiple strategies in each of these communities. What I think we have to do also is really ask ourselves as we're rebuilding, why the hell didn't we protect these communities? Let's start there.
Mhm.
Because had we protected communities and done what was needed, it either could have been completely prevented or certainly the damage would have been mitigated. There's nobody that will ever convince me that the level of this disaster had to happen or couldn't have been avoided. That's just not accurate.
Mhm.
And this is where I think in government, where they fail miserably, is accountability. Stand up and say, we really screwed this one up and we're going to learn from it. Because that's what you would do in private industry. And I'm sure that's what you talk about in your class.
Mhm. I think that's a good point. I'm gonna go back a bit on that and talk about, regulations, because sometimes we present regulations as coming out of thin air, that some bureaucrat just decides they want this regulation, when in fact, if you think about something like zoning, often that is people in the community who have resources kind of lobbying to manage zoning in particular ways, right? So I guess I wonder then, as you think about eliminating regulations, red tape, there's someone who's going to be affected by that in ways that they prefer not to be. There's someone who, benefits from some component of that regulation, probably. How do you manage that? How do you overcome that?
But don't you have to test it out on a case by case basis? So I would say to you, let's just say, for example, again, in my world, is it going to make our project better for the community if I have 12 different boards that I have to go present to versus three? Right. So I, I think it's a case by case basis to look at what your ultimate goal is and then work backwards.
Mhm.
The ultimate goal is we want people to invest in our community. Again, from a development side, invest in our community, build great projects that benefit the community, respect the community, the right scale in the community, create jobs in the community, all those kind of things. We don't want people to take advantage of our community. So how do we accomplish that? You actually become such a impediment. We just went through, I'll give you a great example. We just went through a project up in Montecito, which is Santa Barbara, where we wanted to build a smaller retail component, some market rate apartments, along with workforce housing for employees, low income workforce housing for employees. That took 2 years. It took probably, over a dozen meetings, board meetings, public meetings. We ultimately have been approved. I don't know if that was what we needed for that project. Spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and we could have been just as responsive with the community with half of those meetings potentially. So I don't know the right answer, but I'm not a big fan of over-regulating anything.
Mhm. No, I think that's a reasonable position. I think I'm just wondering each constituent that is putting this additional barrier in front of you has a reason for their barrier, right? They're just not coordinating. So in the end, there's all these different barriers to building, as an example. This is you think about San Francisco, and there's all kinds of restrictions in building in San Francisco. How does that happen? Because there are constituents who have power to put up, impediments, and you have politicians responding to those constituents, and then this is my sense of what's happening anyway. You deal with this. You can tell me if this is true or not. Next thing you know, there's 5 different boards you're meeting with to try to get through a project.
Mhm.
10 different boards you're getting meeting with. But it's aggregating over different constituents, right? That's what I assume is going on. And if that's fair, I guess the question is like, how do you get those? Whose job is it to get those constituents to see the greater good?
Yeah, it's interesting, Brian, because I guess what I want to ask you is why do you assume that there's a constituent that has demanded that extra layer of government approval?
Oh, because I assume that people, well, this is maybe about me, because I assume that people are acting in their self-interest. So if a government official put that in place, it's because they thought it was an interest to do so. And most government officials are interested in getting reelected. And therefore,
All
it
right.
is representing someone's interest, either a donor who's helping them get reelected or a voting base who wants that. That's my assumption.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I challenged the how can I say this, the directness of that nexus,
Mm.
because my experience has been, and it's not that it's completely untrue what you're saying, but my experience has been is sort of like this flywheel. And once this flywheel starts moving, there's this inertia, and things happen just by the very nature of the inertia that may not be rooted in any really great purpose. Um, and and some of it, in my experience, has been people within government that frankly want to sort of cover their rear ends by saying, well, we had this process, and so it's
Mhm.
not my fault.
Yeah.
And to your point, which I think is a really important point, that you have to understand if you want to be successful working with government, they are not compensated for taking risk. And generally, an elected official's number one priority is to be reelected.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's why if you don't care about being reelected or reappointed, but you just make decisions based on what's in the best interest of your constituents, for your word, really amazing things can happen.
Mhm. Mhm. That makes sense. So I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you, what do you think private leaders can learn from public leadership?
Well, it's very different. I think you certainly, what I've had to learn is you have to have a lot more patience. Um, you don't have the ability of the decision-making process. It's very different. Doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just different. Um, and many, many people, I think, in the private industry do not understand the levels of agendas that are in government, um, and the sensitivity to those different agendas that have to be sort of balanced out and worked through. The art of finding common ground, I think, is more important in government. If you're good at it, it's really powerful. Private industry is not doing as much on that. You're in a competitive situation, and you're either, you know, leading, following, or getting out of somebody's way. But I think it's really healthy. I know for me, it's been really healthy, very eye opening, at times very frustrating, but really eye opening. in running a company and also being on the government side.
Mm. I have one last question for you. There are a lot of young leaders that will hear this, and what would you want to leave them with? What kind of essence would you want them to have from your leadership experience?
Public service is amazing. Go do it. Go do it. It will be one of the most rewarding things in your life. And I'm not suggesting do it for life, whether you're an elected official or appointed. Um, Dedicate your time to it because you're going to learn so much. It's going to open up your eyes and you're going to get this incredible satisfaction I have gotten of serving people, and you will actually make a difference and see it. And it's really pretty immediate too. Um, so I think the combination of public service, private enterprise coming together puts you in a remarkable situation in life to have a whole bunch of options down the road. And I think any great education like you're getting at Stanford, it's all about options that you're creating for yourself. And this takes you to the next level, in my opinion. I've been really blessed that I had the opportunity to do this. And a guy named Tom Bradley believed in me for no good reason and gave me the chance, and it changed my life.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Rick. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. Really enjoyed it. Appreciate you.